Come closer, I'll find your wife. Come on, come closer. Everybody come closer. जल्दी करो यार जल्दी. मुक्तदा भाई वो सबको अंदर लेके आओ जरा यार जल्दी करो. There's plenty of space on the left side or the right side depending on how you look at it. Anybody lost something that looks like a smart watch? Fitbit.
I'll take it.
Timbits? Fitbit.
I'll take it.
Okay, let's see. I'm full. I had really good food. So pizza sounds nasty to me right now. So how many people want to eat? And don't be bashful. Come on, guys. If you don't raise your hand, I'm going to watch that you don't get anything.
Only the kids' votes matter.
Adil, Hisham, go see how many sisters raised their hand. 2? Okay. Okay, we'll order some pizza. And, no, we'll check, sorry. Take it, Sean. Yeah. We already got it now. Okay, Jazakallah. Make see that brother right there with his head down? We're looking for a spouse for him as soon as possible. All right?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الأمين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. Dear respected brothers and elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Is the mic volume? Okay? Can you hear me? Okay, inshallah. Jazakallah khair for hosting us. Inshallah, hopefully we will find this beneficial, inshallah ta'ala. The first thing we want to discuss before delving into this topic is what is our purpose and goal behind today's discussion. Whenever we delve into anything, embark on any journey, we want to know our ghard. We want to know our intention behind it. We want to know what we want to get out of it. We don't just jump into things without any intent behind it. So today's lesson, I want us to keep two things in mind. First of all, this is a historical lesson. This is a lesson on history. A certain portion of history, about 100 years in the 1100s, Common Era. 1100s is a certain portion of history from Muslim history. That's the first step that we want to keep in mind. Oftentimes, growing up in the West, we come to sometimes think that Islam just sprung up yesterday. Right? My parents are Muslim, I'm Muslim, and that's kind of the end of the story. That's not really the case. We have a rich history, a political history, of military prowess, of intellectual tradition. We have 1,400 years of history behind us. So sometimes living up in the West, we don't see the remnants of previous civilizations. We don't see the remnants and structures and buildings and people and different historical aspects and artifacts of Muslim civilization, specifically in the Americas and North America, because Islam hasn't existed here for a long period of time. But if we travel to other parts of the world, whether it's Turkey, Syria, India, the subcontinent, Pakistan, Africa, we will see remnants of Muslim civilization. So since we don't necessarily have that, it is of the utmost importance for us living in the West to know our history, to know our past. So that's the first goal. We want to know our past. Secondly, Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the Imams of fiqh, who codified the madhab or a school of thought in fiqh, he mentions, again, when we say Imam Abu Hanifa, we think about fiqh. He mentions, حكاية الأولياء أحب إلي من كثير من الفقه. That the stories of the righteous people, the stories of those individuals who are close to God, those individuals, those stories are more beloved to me than much of fiqh itself. Why? Because when we read the stories of the people of the past, it grants us insight to how they lived. It grants us insight to how they were able to go through the tribulations and trials of their time and come out successful. And what is success? Success is that we don't abandon faith when the things get rough. When things get rough, we increase in our faith. We look at their lives and it grants us solace. It grants us peace. That they went through difficulties. They went through different troubles. But they were able to survive. So today's lesson is a very important lesson. Today's lesson is very pertinent to current political current political landscape. We know what Masjid al-Aqsa is going through. May Allah return it back to Muslim hands. Ameen. But we've lost it before. We've lost it before. How did we get it back? We want to understand that insight. So it grants us peace. Allah Azza wa Jalla will give it back to the Muslims. That is a promise. It will come back to the Muslims. But we have to see that what did these people, these luminaries of the past, what did they do to bring it back into their hands? So that's what we're going to analyze today. About 100 years of Muslim history in a certain region. It's not the entire Muslim world. It's of the Levant, the Sham area, which is Syria, which is Lebanon, which is Jordan, which is Palestine, of course, and of course some portion of Egypt as well. So that specific kind of western side of the Muslim world is what we're going to discuss today, inshallah. So with that mentioned, let us jump right into it, inshallah ta'ala. Some background information that we kind of need to know. Prior to the Crusades, in the 1000s, we have an empire that rules over the Muslim lands known as the Seljuk Empire. Just a show of hands, who's heard of the Seljuks? MashaAllah, some of you guys have heard of the Seljuk Empire. The Seljuk Empire are a group of nomadic Turks that existed and lived for generations behind the Oxus River. Let me pull up a map for you. This over here, what's behind the Oxus River is known as Transaxiana. And in Arabic, it's known as Ma Wara'u Nahar. What is behind the river? What is behind the Oxus River? Over here, you have the Stan countries, modern day Stan countries. Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, all these Stan countries. This is what you call the Central Asian steppes. Over here, you have these Turkic nomadic individuals that live over there. And they live nomadic tribe, like a nomadic tribe. What does that mean? Look over here in the background. In the background, you have this picture. This over here is a tent. This is a yurt. And this is what they call a yurt in Turkish. Where they live in these hilly grasslands. You can't really have agriculture. You can't really grow crops over here. They have their cattle, specifically sheep and goats, and they settle in an area next to some water source and have the vegetation for their cattle. They live there for an X amount of time, and then they move to the next area. They're not necessarily civilized people. They didn't build cities. So these Turkic nomadic people, they decide to cross over the river after Islam is introduced to them and come to the Muslim lands. Right over here, if you can see this dark blue area, right around there is where the Oxus River is. So they come over, and these individuals, these people are known to be warriors. They live most of their lives on horses, right? So they come over, and they eventually take over much of the Muslim lands, and they end up ruling as the Muslim Sultan of that time. And these individuals are known as the Great Seljuk Empire. Now there's a lot of details, but we're not going to delve into that. But the peak of their power, again, they were Muslims, and they ruled over modern-day Iraq, modern-day Iran, and some portions of northern Pakistan, northern Afghanistan. Okay? So they ruled over these lands. The peak of their power was during Al-Arsalan and Malik Shah. These were the two strongest sultans, Muslim sultans of their time. They're very important individuals. Specific Al-Arsalan, we'll talk about him in a second. But they also had a Grand Vizier. What's a Grand Vizier? It's your right-hand man. It's your minister. The guy that you do mashwara with. The guy that you do consultation with on every affair. And this guy, his name was Nizam al-Mulk, rahimahullah ta'ala. He's a very important individual. This man was not Turkish. He's Persian. And Persians are known to be able to run the government. They're very good at bureaucracy. They know how to run governments. Because they've been running governments for 2,000 years. Right? Before they became Muslim. So this man, Nizam al-Mulk, organizes the Turkish Empire. Because again, these Turkish people, they're nomads. They don't really know how to run a civilization necessarily. So they needed somebody. This Nizam al-Mulk was able to help kind of organize the government in terms of finance, politics, economics, etc. But the second most important thing that he did is that he established the first state-sponsored institutions, or state-sponsored madaris, where people and students of knowledge would enroll and learn the Islamic sciences and the quote-unquote non-Islamic sciences. In the past, when you entered into a madrasa, when you entered a state-sponsored curriculum, a state-sponsored institution, you would learn hadith, fiqh, Arabic, tafsir, aqidah, theology, and all this. At the same time, you learn medicine. At the same time, you learn mathematics. At the same time, you learn geometry, you learn astronomy, etc. So this is what they learned. And one such individual that was a part or the product of these state-sponsored institutions were none other than Imam Al-Ghazali, rahimahullah ta'ala. Just for show of hands, how many of you guys have heard of Imam Al-Ghazali, rahimahullah ta'ala? MashaAllah, many of you. Imam Al-Ghazali was a polymath. Imam Al-Ghazali mastered many different sciences. Imam Al-Ghazali debated the atheists of his time. Imam Al-Ghazali debated the heretical Shia 7 groups at that time. Imam Al-Ghazali helped cultivate the spiritual strength of the people at that time. He was a very, very important individual, and he's a direct product of the Nizamiyya, or the state-sponsored Seljuk institutes. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, this one date, 1071, is a very, very important battle. I want all of us to remember this date, 1071, Common Era. We have what is known as the Battle of Manzikert. So what happens is, right over here, let me pull up the pointer. Can you see the pointer? Okay. So right over here is Manzikert. Right, it's a location, it's known as the Battle of Manzikert. Right over here is Manzikert. To the west of this, prior to this battle, all of this area is ruled by the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire are the Eastern Roman Empire. Okay, so they rule from Constantinople, which is Istanbul, modern-day Istanbul, which is in modern-day Turkey. This area, the Turkish people are not native to this area. Like I mentioned, the Turkish people are native to the Central Asian steppes over here. How did they end up over here? It's because of the Battle of Manzikert. So now this is a pivotal battle between Alp Arslan and the Muslim Seljuk Empire versus the Byzantine Empire. They meet up, they battle in 1071, complete victory for the Muslims, such that the emperor of Constantinople, the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, is captured and brought into the tent of Alp Arslan. Alp Arslan, seeing that he completely destroyed the enemy, is like, what am I going to get out of killing you? So he sends him back and frees him, sends him back to Constantinople. But because of this battle, the Muslims, specifically the Turkish Muslims who are nomads, they don't really live in cities, now they can move into this, what we call Anatolia. Anatolia is modern-day Turkey. They move in over there, and they're able to form their own tribes, and they end up increasing in population over there. And that's how the Muslims ended up in modern-day Turkey. Again, Turkish people, not native to Turkey. They eventually moved there, and they intermingled with the local Greek population, and this is why Turkish people look different than people from Uzbekistan or Turkmenistan. The other Stan countries, they still kind of have an Asian look to them. But however, the Turkish people look very different today. It's because they intermingled with the local Greek population, and many of them became Muslims as well. So, Battle of Manzikert is very important. Why are we talking about the Battle of Manzikert? Well, what does that have to do with anything about the Crusades? In history, it's very hard to sometimes see a chain reaction. Okay, this happened and that happened because of this. X happened, Y happened. It's not easy to oversimplify and reductionize history. However, the Battle of Manzikert is one of those instances where you see the Battle of Manzikert and you literally see the steps as it leads up to the Crusades. You literally see the steps. And why is that? What happens is, the Turks again start to move to Anatolia. They take over much of the Byzantine lands, and they lose much of their lands, the Byzantines. So what happens? The Byzantine emperor, he seeks help from the Catholic Pope Urban II. Now why is this really crazy? Can anyone give me an answer to why this would seem crazy? Why is this such a big thing? Can anyone guess? You have to know a little bit about Christian history to take a guess at this. Let me give you a hint. Are Christians all one denomination, all united? What are the two major Christian denominations or Christian groups?
Protestant, Catholic.
Okay, Protestants come much later, but Catholics. And prior to that, prior to the Protestants, what was the other group? Orthodox, exactly. The Western Roman Empire was Orthodox. The Eastern Roman Empire was Orthodox, which is again the Byzantine Emperor. The Western Roman Empire is Catholic. They consider each other as kuffar. That if they went to battle, they'd kill each other because they're kuffar. To each other, they're kuffar. So now the Byzantine Emperor is begging the Catholic Pope, please help us. These Muslims are at the door. So this is very, in their eyes, humiliating to ask the Catholic Pope because they consider each other kuffar. But it's like, okay, look, at the end of the day, we're whatever Christian. Even though we don't believe you're Christian, you don't believe we're Christian, whatever. Help us in fighting these Muslims. So now the Catholic Pope is like, it's a perfect chance. He doesn't really care about the Orthodox. If the Muslims completely finish off their empire, that's good for him. But this was a perfect chance for him. So he preached a pan-European crusade. Right? He basically gave dawah, he gave tashkil, he was like, hey, we need to go fight these Muslims. Let's go take back Masjid al-Aqsa. Why did he do this? Primarily for two reasons. To release tensions. So Europe at that time is going through the Dark Ages. They have a feudal system where most of the population are servants to a land. They work on that land, they toil for that land, they give most of the produce and crops to the master or the knight that rules over them, and they get barely anything for their day-to-day necessities. What happens? If you're barely surviving, you're not going to have time for education. You're not going to have time to go learn anything. So most of the European population are what you call uneducated, quote unquote. They blindly follow the church. They blindly follow the Pope. And they have no idea. Whatever the Pope says, that's it, right? It's very different than Islam, right? The level of Pope is next to prophethood to them, okay? So many of them are very barbaric. Many of them just want to go out and battle, this type of thing. But the Europeans now have conquered most of Europe. Prior to Christianity, there was a bunch of pagans that used to live here, right? So the Christians would fight the pagans. But there's no more pagans now, there's a bunch of Christians. Where do we go to fight? Hey, these guys are asking help to fight against the Muslims. Go fight the Muslims. So that's the first thing. And secondly, the Pope promised all these servants to the land. If you go and fight, we'll grant you freedom. You get your own land. You can do whatever you want. So it's a huge incentive, right? There's religious rigor, religious incentive, right? Go get back to Holy Land. As we know, Masjid al-Aqsa is important for all three religions, Abrahamic religions. And secondly, this is a way for them to escape their horrible life. So this causes a huge impetus for individuals to go out and fight and conquer. So now there's a bunch of people that just show up. Now what's going on? Now this is about a few decades after Malik Shah passes away. Malik Shah is the last real strong Seljuk Sultan. After him, the princes, his cousins, his nephews, his nieces, they're all kind of fighting and vying for power. What happens when a bunch of people are vying for power? The Muslim Ummah gets weakened. The Muslim Ummah is not unified on a front and on a military basis. Therefore, each of them are fighting over their own different provinces, different states that they have. The Muslims are not really expecting these Christians to come out of nowhere. The Christians come and basically conquer most of the Syrian lands. Let me pull up a map. Actually, prior to the map. So they marched through Seljuk Anatolia. One of the Seljuk leaders at that area is defeated. And at the end, 4 Latin principalities, so basically 4 Latin kingdoms, okay? Or Latin states or cities or whatever you want to call it, right? But 4 kingdoms are established. You have the kingdom of Edessa, which is in modern-day Turkey. The kingdom of Antioch, which is modern-day Turkey. The kingdom of Tripoli, which is modern-day Lebanon, Syria. Not to be confused with the Tripoli of Libya, okay? This is, again, in the Syrian area. And, of course, Jerusalem in 1099. These crusaders, by their own chroniclers and historians, proudly say that when we walked in, the blood of the Muslim was up to their knees, right? And these crusaders were notorious even amongst the Christians that when they came in, they didn't just kill the Muslims, they killed the Jews, and even beyond that, they killed all Christian denominations that were not Catholic. They killed everyone. So the entire basically city was kind of wiped out, other than those who were Catholic. So of course, there was brutal, there was oppression. So 4 of these cities are established. Again, the Muslims were not unified. They were fighting amongst each other. And this is something that we need to keep in mind. This is sometimes when people talk about history, they want to paint a romanticized version of history where the Ummah till 100 years ago were all unified on one front. It's not necessarily the case. There were times, right, the political leaders would fight against each other. Something important to keep in mind. We do not look to political leaders for role models, as role models. The political leaders are there and they're supposed to take care of the affairs of the Muslims. But at the end of the day, they're playing politics. They're not necessarily going to do the most taqwa thing to do. We don't look at the political leaders as role models. We look for the religious leaders. The religious leaders are the ulama. The religious leaders are the awliya. The religious leaders are those close servants and scholars of Allah Azza wa Jalla. That's how the Muslim Ummah ran. Regardless of who's leading, they took their guidance, their spiritual guidance, their religious guidance and intellectual guidance from the ulama and the seniors, awliya and the shuyukh, the mashayikh of the Ummah. That's how the Ummah ran for 1300 years, 1400 years. So that's something important to keep in mind. So if you see on this map right over here, you can see the 4 principalities that are established. One second. Right over here, all the way in the north, is Edessa. Again, this right over here is Turkey, modern day Turkey. Edessa is right over here. You have Antioch right over here, and Tripoli, and of course Jerusalem all the way in the south, which is right next to Egypt. Okay, so these are the 4 different principalities. So this whole western side of Syria is basically conquered by the Crusaders. And they're able to keep this land for a while because they have the ports. They're right next to the water. So they're right next to the Mediterranean Sea. So they can easily get reinforcements, easily get goods, and anything they need straight from the waters right over here. So they have this western front. And again, keep in mind, Crusaders didn't come to take over the whole Muslim world. They took over this portion, which is very sad. But keep in mind, Crusaders did not take the whole Muslim world. There's still a whole another portion of the Muslim world that the Crusaders had no impact on. Okay, and we'll touch about that at the end, inshallah. Sorry, when I go to the laser pointer, I can't move my slides. Okay. So what happens is, for a few years, few decades, Muslims are not able to give any sort of blow to these 4 Crusader principalities, and the Muslims are not able to actually do anything to them. They have these 4 principalities, and they're ruling over them. One thing to keep in mind, Islam is such a culture, Islam is such a religion, it's a way of life, that when people interact with it, they can't help but adopt some sort of that lifestyle. So the Christians that came in and settled in these different lands, it's not as if they lived there and they were oppressing the Muslims day in, day out for 80 years. That was not the case at all. Actually, first generation, second generation, by the third generation, they're basically kind of Arab. Okay? They're basically kind of Muslim. They might have not accepted Islam, but they had intermingled with the Muslim population to an extent. So the settlers, those who moved to these areas after it was conquered, they had good cordial relationship with the Muslims. They themselves say that but what happens is the new Crusaders that come and they want to conquer more land, and these new barbarians that come from the European lands, and they come, these are the ones who start doing a lot of war crimes, if you want to say. And the Christians that live there now, the ones that settled a couple decades before, they're like, these new guys are ruining our relationship with the Muslims. They themselves say in their history book. So keep in mind, in the city, for the most part, there wasn't necessarily those always fights going on, these individuals trying to slaughter all the Muslims, take over the land. It's not the case. Very much unlike what's going on in Israel today. Okay, not similar in Palestine today by the Israelis. Very much different. When they came in, yes, at first there was a lot of dhulm that took place, a lot of murder, a lot of things that took place. But afterwards, those who settled, they kind of had a relationship, right? These other cities, only Jerusalem was very much completely slaughtered. The other cities, those type of atrocities didn't take place for the most part. So that's something to keep in mind. But yes, in the outskirts around the cities, in the farmlands, whenever these new Crusaders, new Knight Templars would come, yes, they would have to farm. So it was not a safe place outside of the cities. So we have this individual. He's known as Imad Zengi. We want to remember his name. He's very important. So he is appointed as Emir of Mosul. Mosul is in modern day Iraq. This is a huge shift in the balance of power. Imad Zengi was a strong leader. People respected him and people loved him. So when he came to power, he made things straight. First of all, he took Mosul. When he came to Mosul, he made things straight. He has this famous proverb that's attributed to him. There can't be 2 tyrants in one city. What he was saying? That look, I'm the tyrant, I'm going to keep things straight. But if you do any oppression to anybody, I will take you to task. And he did. Any Muslim, anyone in his army that did any oppression to any person of any faith, he was reprimanded. And so he was very strict upon his army. And this is why they were very loyal to him and very scared of him. And this is why they were a unified front. at least those who were under him. So he had that kind of image, right? And that what he put into his military men. And this is why they were able to achieve things. He was also a very righteous individual. He kept that in mind as well. So Imad-ad-Din al-Zengi, he begins a united front against the Crusaders. And his most important feat is the conquest, or rather the reconquest of Edessa. Edessa is one of those principalities, one of those kingdoms that the Crusaders took a few decades prior. So he's able to reconquer Edessa. Why is this important? Let's put up the map one more time. You see Edessa is all the way right here. You can see my mouse? I guess you can't see my mouse. 1 second. Yeah, you see my mouse pointer right here? Edessa is right over here. It's the most north province or kingdom of the Crusaders. So it has a lot of economic, strategic importance. If you have this, you basically block any sort of funneling of reinforcements or goods or anything coming from the Byzantine Empire. So you basically block them off on this point. Also, it's a very economic importance because it's right over here. The west is connected to the west and the east. If he needs to go to Byzantine, if he needs to go to the other Muslim lands, if he needs to go south, if he needs to go north, it's a very important trade route as well. So conquering Edessa or reconquering Edessa gives strategic military importance, and also it gives a lot of economic boost to Zengi's kingdom as well, Imad-ad-Din Zengi. So he's able to reconquer Edessa. Long story short, how is he able to reconquer it? The king of Edessa, his name is Sulaiman II. He had this habit of going to another city and engaging in very bad habits. There's younger people here, so I'm not going to explain that, but you can imagine. So he would do that once in a while. So Zengi knew this. So he pretended to attack a city that's in the complete opposite direction of Edessa. So Joseph was like, hey, perfect, let me go and do whatever I want. So he dips with a few people, with some of his military men, and goes to another city. Again, this is just a feint. It was just a fake maneuver. So then he sieges Edessa. Now Joseph can't come back inside now, because he's outside. So already the leader's not there. So these individuals, the Crusaders that are the Christians inside of Edessa, they can't really hold up a unified front. Also, there's a scholar named Musa al-Armani. He sneaks inside, goes to a minaret, and calls the adhan. They haven't conquered the place yet. But it makes it seem like to Jocelyn and the people outside that, hey, they went in, they already conquered everything, the adhan's taking place, so they surrendered. So this was a smart maneuver by the alim Musa al-Armani. So after 28 days, Edessa is given under Muslim control. This is a huge morality boost, or moral boost to the Muslims. That like, this man can actually do something. This is the first solid win against the Crusaders. So a lot of people join his army. He gains a lot of support. It garners up a lot of support. This also causes another crusade to come by. It doesn't go anywhere. They're not able to do anything. So Imad-ad-Din al-Zengi eventually passes away, and his son Nuruddin al-Zengi, he takes after his father, and he rules the lands, some portion of the land that his the father had, and his brother also helps him out. He also was a very strong ruler. He's a lot more religiously minded than his father. He established many madaris, institutions of learning, and many welfare organizations. Of course, the population and the Muslims already like him a lot. Again, he had an intense focus of jihad against the Crusaders, so that's why many people joined him as well. So again, because his father was able to conquer Edessa, this sent shockwaves across Europe. They got very scared. Second Crusade, they begin to besiege Damascus. Damascus, again, is in Syria. Damascus was never conquered by the Crusaders, so they want to take Damascus. Nuruddin al-Zengi, he comes to help. He's like, I'm not letting you take Damascus. And he forces the Crusaders to retreat. And the people of Damascus themselves, they kind of overthrow the leader. Like, hey, Zengi, Nuruddin Zengi, we want you as our leader. So again, you see what's going on over here. For you to take Jerusalem, you need to take out the other enemies first. For you to conquer Jerusalem, you need a united front. So Imad-ad-Din al-Zengi is starting this united Syrian dynasty or empire. He passes away, Nuruddin Zengi comes next. And he's expanding that front. So he's able to circle in Jerusalem where there's only Jerusalem left, so they can fight back. They have to take out all the other enemies first and be united to an extent under one ruler so that they can actually do something. So then Nuruddin al-Zengi takes the next step. And of course, the one who finishes off is none other than Salahuddin. Let's backtrack a little bit. So we're talking about Nuruddin Zengi. His father was, what was his father's name? Imaduddin Zengi. Imaduddin Zengi, long story short, he was running away from an enemy. Okay, the enemy was chasing him. His army lost really badly. He goes to a city called Tikrit, and he asks them for help. Hey, let me get inside your fortress. Please let me in. These people are coming after me. Please help me out over here. The leader of that fort agrees. He's like, yes, come in. Can anyone guess who the leader of that fort is? Take a wild guess. Sorry? Close. Not Salahuddin. Who else? No, that's his own son. This is before.
The father of Salahuddin?
Yes, the father of Salahuddin Ayyubi, Najmuddin al-Ayyubi. The father of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi grants him his request of beseechment, like, yes, come in, I take care of you. This favor, Imaduddin Zengi did not forget. Later on, much in the future, Najmuddin Ayyubi, in that same city of Tikrit, he's still the governor-ish, kind of, and his brother Shirkuh is also there. Again, two names. I know there's a lot of names. I should have mentioned earlier to bring a notebook or something. There's a lot of names, but we'll try to keep as much as we can. Najmuddin Ayyubi, the father of Salahuddin, Najmuddin's brother Shirkuh, they rule over Tikrit. However, what happens? Somebody from they don't necessarily rule over Tikrit. They have a high position in Tikrit. Let's just say that. Okay. So somebody in the military, he does something very inappropriate with a woman. So Shirkuh gets upset that is my ghayrah for that Muslim woman. That how could you do that to a Muslim woman of our city? So he takes revenge on behalf of her and finishes him off. Now this upsets the entire military because that guy was close to the rest of the military. So both Najmuddin Ayyubi and Shirkuh are forced to leave the city that they were a part of. Now they're in the middle of nowhere. They have nowhere else to go. So where do they go? Where do you think they go? Where do you think they go to ask for help? Yes, Imaduddin Zengi. Because they helped Imaduddin Zengi a few years prior. So now they go to Imaduddin Zengi. Imaduddin Zengi does not forget the favor, and he's like, yes, you helped me before, I'm helping you now, you come in. And he makes them commanders in his military office. While they were being exiled from their city, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi is born. He is born while they're being exiled. The father's like, man, this is just like bad timing. And he is like, I don't know if this is a good thing that I had a son at this point in time. His servant, and this is something really important to keep in mind, ad-deenu an-nasiha. Deen is just about giving good counsel. You never know when you advise a person, you give him some good mudhakara of remembrance, remind, because reminder is beneficial to believers. You never know what impact it's going to have. So Najmuddin Ayyubi is very like despondent, is like, what's the point, this is a really bad time to have a son, right? The servant's like, hey, don't say that. Perhaps a lot of khayr will come from this individual. Perhaps you will unite the Muslims and fight against these Christians. And then the father's like, you're right, I should not have said that, thought of those things. He said, Ameen, and continued. Perhaps because of the dua of this sincere servant of Najmuddin Ayyubi, Allah accepted that and he became Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. So never undermine a good counsel. Never undermine the chance to give some sort of da'wah to anyone with hikmah, with wisdom, inshallah ta'ala. So again, now they're in Salahuddin. He Najmuddin, is welcomed by Imaduddin Zengi. He welcomes them warmly. So Salahuddin grows up under three great men. Imaduddin Zengi, his father Najmuddin Ayyubi. Sorry, not Imaduddin. Imaduddin passed away by the time. Nuruddin Zengi, Imaduddin's son. Okay, his son. Nuruddin Zengi, his father Najmuddin Ayyub, and his uncle Shirkuh. These three individuals were the most important individuals in Salahuddin Ayyubi's life. These three individuals taught Salahuddin to be Salahuddin. They taught him military prowess, they taught him strategic plans, they taught him all those things, but they also inculcated him the love of Islam, and the love of fighting for Islam, and the love of respecting the people of Islam. So these individuals were very, very important. So Nuruddin Zengi really liked Salahuddin. So he treated him well, he treated him like his own son. He grew up in Damascus, and he learned, again, military and political prowess from his father, uncle, Nuruddin. However, prior to the age of 25, even though his father and his uncle part of the political council. They're very close to the leader. They engage in politics all the time, fighting this and that. There's not much mention of Salahuddin in the political realm before 25. No one really knows anything about him. That's because he spent most of his youth and most of his days, earlier days, with the ulama. He was a scholar, or becoming a scholar in his own regard. He had extreme love for fiqh and hadith and theology and aqidah. He memorized the Quran very young, and he used to spend a lot of time with the ulama in Damascus. You know, imagine Damascus 600, 700 years ago. Damascus is filled with the ulama. So this is what he was doing at that time. So he didn't really, he knew how to fight, obviously. He knew strategic plans and stuff like that. But that's not really what he was looking for. He wanted to be a scholar. Later on, his personal biographer mentions that I would see Salahuddin walking by the gatherings of ulama with tears in his eyes, because he wanted to sit there, but he had to go do other things. There's something important, another lesson for us to keep in mind. Sometimes we want to go on a specific path, but Allah Azza wa Jalla has chosen something else for us. Allah Azza wa Jalla says in the Quran, "Asa an takrahu shay'an fahuwa khayrun." Perhaps you dislike something, you don't want it, but it's good for you. So we don't know necessarily what Allah has in store for us, but we have to adopt taqwa, God consciousness, and do what we can in whatever path Allah has built for us. We go in that path, and we try our best. We can't be sitting there disappointed with what I'm doing in life. No, we try, of course, we try to engage and excel as much as we can. But if Allah has chosen a different path, if Allah has chosen something for us, we try our best in that regard. And this Salahuddin is a perfect example. He did not want anything to do with politics or fighting or military or all that stuff. We'll come to talk about that in a bit. But Allah put him somehow as the Sultan of Egypt, as we'll come to see, inshallah. Just an important point that I wanted to mention. So, at this point in time, the Syrian front is mostly reconquered by Nuruddin Zengi. Najmuddin Ayyub, the father of Salahuddin, is in the military. Shirkuh is in the military. So these three have primarily got a lot of the Syrian lands back. Of course, the lands of the Crusaders have been crushed to a very small portion. The kingdom still exists. Edessa, of course, is back to the Muslims. But the other lands are still there. However, before conquering Jerusalem, there's a very important place that needs to be solidified. You can't feel the threat from Egypt. Egypt at this time, can anyone take a guess? Who is it ruled by? At this time period in time, yes? Yes, mashallah. The Fatimid dynasty. Who are the Fatimids? Anyone? What denomination are they? Yes, the Shia. The 7 Shias, the heretical Muslims. They have their own aqa'id and their own beliefs that we're not going to delve into. But they were the rulers of Cairo and Egypt at this period of time. They've ruled there for about 200 years. But at this point in time, they're very weak. Very, very weak. Okay? So Egypt is ruled by the Fatimids. So if the Muslims try to attack Jerusalem, these Fatimids are just going to attack them from the other front. It's not going to work out. Okay? So what happens is, the Khalifa, quote-unquote Khalifa, of the Fatimids, or what they call the Imam, he's just a puppet. He's just sitting in his room, and beyond 10, 15 walls, just sitting there by himself doing whatever he wants to do. He doesn't really have power. The one with the real power is the Grand Vizier, or the minister, or technically the right-hand man of the Sultan, of the Khalifa, but he has the most power. So this man's name was Shawab. Okay, he's the Grand Vizier of the Fatimid dynasty. This Shawab there's a lot of internal disputations going on during the Fatimid reign, and he somehow gets kicked out of his own post. And somebody else is trying to take over. So he goes to Nuruddin, "Hey Nuruddin, please help me out. I will pay for the expedition. I will pay the whole thing. Taking care of your army, feeding your army, and shelter and all that stuff. I'll take care of it. And I'll give you a third of this year's income. Okay, whatever we make, whatever we earn, I'll give you a third of the crops, right? Back in the time, it's mostly based on crops. I'll give you a third of the crops." Zengi was hesitant because he did not want to trust this guy. He seemed a little shady. However, due to many different reasons, he accepts. So, Nuruddin Zengi, who does he send? He sends Shirkuh and Shirkuh's nephew, Salahuddin. He sends him to Egypt. They go to Egypt. They fight the other force within the Fatimids, and they reinstate Shawab as the Grand Vizier. However, the Shawab, just think of him as a very horrible individual. Shawab, he breaks all his promises, kicks Salahuddin and Shirkuh and their army out, the Zengian army out, and he does not give them anything. So he does this once. And of course, Nuruddin Zengi is not going to take this backing down, so they fight, but eventually there's a truce, and they go back. This happens 2 more times. Shawar comes the second time, hey, please help me, and I'll give you X, Y, and Z. Again, Zengi is a little hesitant about it, but due to many different political reasons, he says yes. They go, again, Shawar backstabs. A third time, something comes up, hey, Zengi, please help me out. Zengi says, sure, we'll come. But he tells Shirkuh and Salahuddin, finish him off this time. Go in and finish him off this time. Take over, help him out, and finish him off. So they do just that. They go, they fight whoever the enemy was, which was the Crusaders at that time, and they dispose and they behead Shawab for his treachery every single time. And who do they put as the next Grand Vizier? Shirkuh. Shirkuh becomes a Grand Vizier. Again, the Grand Vizier has the most power. Now this is very weird because Shirkuh is again the military commander of the Zengid dynasty, and he's a Sunni Muslim, and he's also the Grand Vizier of the Fatimid Shi'i dynasty. So now this is just a weird relationship, okay? But what happens is, sorry, I'm going over slides. But what happens is, by the qadr and the decree of Allah Azza wa Jalla, Shirkuh died. Oh, I'm sorry, I have to backtrack a little bit. This third time, when Salahuddin was sent to Egypt, Salahuddin said, I'm not going. What am I going to do there? I have no care for this stuff. Let me just spend time with ulama. I don't want to go. I want to stay here. So he's like, I'm not going. Nuruddin Zengi, and he's like a father figure to Salahuddin. Nuruddin Zengi says, you will go support your uncle. When he says that, he's like, okay, I'll go. I guess I'll go. So he goes. Shirkuh's made as the Grand Vizier, but Shirkuh dies in 2 months. And the Sultan or the Khalifa, the quote-unquote Imam of the Shiites, he's the one who decides who's the Grand Vizier. So he looks at, okay, there's a bunch of these political men out here, a bunch of these military men, these guys 50 years old, they won so many battles, these guys 60 years old, they won so many battles, these guys are genius. Oh, then this 31-year-old kid Salahuddin, okay, let's put him as the puppet Vizier. His biggest mistake. He puts Salahuddin as the Grand Vizier. Salahuddin is like, he did not want power, he did not want to be the Sultan, but when Allah puts you in a position, now you have to fulfill its haqq. You don't seek out power, you don't seek out to be an emir, you don't seek out to be the leader, but when Allah puts you in that position, you fulfill its haqq. So as soon as he gets there, he does what he has to do. Long story short, he is the one who has, there's a couple of rebellions, but he has complete power over Egypt and Cairo, and the people love him. Why? Because he was extremely generous. When he became the Grand Vizier, the first thing he did, the palace of the Fatimid Imam or Khalifa had 4,000 rooms. Okay, so you can imagine the amount of wealth that's in there. Unfortunately, the palace never survived. As an artifact, for whatever reason, it wasn't taken care of properly. This basically, it's gone. It's not there anymore. But it had 4,000 rooms and a bunch of gold and a bunch of spoils of war. So he takes all of that, gives it to some of his leaders, gives it some to the military men, and he spreads it amongst the people. He doesn't take a single gold nugget for himself. Nothing. He gives it all. So he's extremely generous. So the people love him. The people completely love him. Eventually, he is basically the ruler of Egypt. The Shi'i Khalifa is just a puppet. He eventually dies. He's only like 21 or 25, something like that. He dies. Salahuddin actually feels bad for him. He's like, he was a nice kid. He was just stuck in this position. He probably wasn't even Shia, to be honest. He just was somehow the descendant of quote-unquote the Imami lineage. He's just forced to stay in his room his entire life. Salahuddin felt bad for him. Eventually, he just happened to die. Allahu A'lam how he died. He wasn't killed. He just died. So now, Salahuddin is the sole ruler of Egypt. Again, Zengi is still alive. He has the whole Syrian lands. And now Salahuddin is now the leader of Cairo, or Egypt. Now one thing to keep in mind, Western chroniclers, again, Salahuddin is loved by everyone. The West loves him, the East loves him, the Arabs love him, the Europeans love him. Everyone loves him. So everyone's writing biographies of him. But however, some things we have to be careful when we read the Western narrative, right? We have to double check it with our Islamic narratives as well. They try to paint a picture that now Zengi and Salahuddin have beef. Zengi gets very jealous that now Salahuddin is ruling over Cairo. However, this, according to some of my teachers, is very far-fetched. Because Zengi was like a father figure to him. And secondly, Salahuddin did not want to go. He did not want to rule Egypt. He had nothing, he didn't even want to go into battle. Now, if Nuruddin said, I want that post as mine, Salahuddin, by all means, he's not going to change his mind over a couple of weeks. But he would just hand it over and go back to what he was doing. He had no interest in sitting there being the Sultan of Cairo and Sultan of Egypt. So that's the first thing. So that's something important. It's very far-fetched that they had any beef. Regardless, Allahu Alam. Anyways, Zengi dies in 2 years. Nuruddin Zengi dies in 2 years after that Salahuddin is able to conquer Egypt. So now Salahuddin eventually he goes to these different Syrian lands and gets the entire Syrian front and Egypt under one man, and that's Salahuddin Ayyubi. Salahuddin Ayyubi, rahimahullah ta'ala. So now there's a united front. There's a united front. What's next? What's next? Jerusalem. What's next is Jerusalem. So the Battle of Hittin is a very important battle. Now, for the purpose of today's class, and understand we're summarizing about 100 years of history into like an hour. We're obviously going to oversimplify a lot of things. We're going to need to skip over a lot of things, a lot of details. But this is what we need to do to at least get introduced to the subject. And then at the end of the class, I will mention some books that we can all read, inshallah ta'ala. It's very important that we're always an intellectual ummah. The first thing that was given to us was iqra. That is what differentiated ourselves from everyone else. We were an intellectual ummah. We mastered both the sciences. We mastered the religious science and the quote-unquote secular sciences. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind, so I will give some suggested reading. So for the purpose of today's lesson, and for the purpose of history overall, it doesn't really matter how somebody won a battle. At the end of the day, it's cool stories, very cool. This guy did this strategic maneuver, he outmaneuvered this guy, and he was able to do all these cool things, and so many victories, and so many heroic experiences in battle. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. All that matters, who won, who lost. Okay? Who won, who lost. So Battle of Hittin shows the political and military prowess and genius that Salahuddin was on the battle. You can watch those different YouTube videos that, for the most part, when it comes to Salahuddin, these battles are pretty accurate, right? I think there's a channel called Kings and Generals that has a whole kind of graphic way of, not graphic in a bad way, but like graphic images and stuff to show you how the whole thing went down. So you can check that out. It's very interesting. He did a very interesting maneuver. He pulled them out to an open land where there is no water at all available. And so they're very thirsty and they just basically surrender. But what happens is there's this man named Renaud de Chatillon. And this man was a very horrible individual. Salahuddin had a truce with him. He was this king of a certain city. He had a truce with him. But however, he broke it and he attacks a Muslim group that was going for business or hajj or something like that, and he takes him as prisoner. Salahuddin said, look, I'll forgive you, just hand them back over and pay up for it. He doesn't listen. And so this ensues in a war. So Salahuddin, like, you took our Muslims, we're going to come for a battle. So this is known as the Battle of Hittin. And Renaud de Chatillon convinces the king of Jerusalem, who didn't necessarily have something to do with this. His name was Guy. The guy's name was literally Guy, okay? King Guy. And he and Renaud de Chatillon pair up and they fight the Muslims. And Salahuddin. Long story short, Salahuddin completely wipes them out. And both King Guy and Renaud de Chatillon are brought in chains into the tent of Salahuddin. Salahuddin looks at King Guy and he says, again, they're very thirsty because this political maneuver, a strategic maneuver, and so he gives him a cold cup of water to drink. Okay, he gives it to King Guy. Guy drinks from it and he passes it to Renaud de Chatillon. Salahuddin takes the butt of his sword and he knocks it out of his hand. He's like, I didn't give you permission to give it to him. I didn't give it to him. You gave it to him. Let him know that. And then he looks at Renaud de Chatillon and he's very infuriated with him. Why? Because this man, Renaud de Chatillon, he tried coming to the frontiers of Mecca and Medina. Obviously he couldn't. And he says horrible things that I'm going to desecrate the Kaaba. I'm going to take Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He says that I will take him out of his grave. Really horrible things. When Salahuddin hears it, he said, by Allah, you will die at my hands. He says that, obviously not to him directly. By Allah, you will die at my hands. It's famous hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that if a servant, a true wali of Allah, if he takes an oath by Allah, Allah will make it true. Allah will make it true. So Allah made it true. So he takes his sword and cuts off the head of Renaud de Chatillon. Now King Guy is terrified. He's like, oh man, I'm next. Salahuddin looks at him, no, listen. It is not befitting of a king to kill another king. We don't do that. We just let them go. But this man went beyond the boundaries. This man over here was very treacherous. You go back to your country. I have no reason to kill you. So he sends him back. And long story short, now this was the main primary army of the protectors of Jerusalem, or the Crusaders, or the Christians of Jerusalem. So there's not much people left. All those people that are left in Jerusalem are the priests and the regular people. So now they siege Jerusalem. Salahuddin, like, listen, he talks to the Pope, the head Pope over there, and he's like, just surrender. You don't need no bloodshed. You know you don't have anybody to fight. Your military has been wiped out. right? We already wiped them out in Battle 15. The Pope's like, listen, it's going to be very embarrassing if we just give it up, because like this is kind of our holy land too, so we're going to just keep fighting. Salahuddin like, oh, sure, but you're going to lose. So they keep fighting. Eventually, they kind of agree to a surrender. Well, Salahuddin's like, okay, cool, I'll let it go. But generally speaking, in the past, when you conquer a city that's rebelling against you, or conquer a city that's fighting against you and doesn't want to surrender, is that everyone that in that city becomes a prisoner of war, right? That's how it's been for thousands of years. So Salahuddin, he's like, listen, I'll give you 40 days. Every person can pay 10, or whatever, dirham, dinar, or whatever, 10 gold coins, and whatever the currency was at that place. And you pay up 10 and you can leave the city unharmed. You can take whatever you want and leave. Just 10. And he said, I'll give you 40 days. So this is a very generous thing, because again, when the Christians came into Jerusalem, what did they do in 1099? What did they do? They completely killed everyone there. So Salahuddin, at first he's like, I'm going to do what they did to us. I'm going to do exactly what they did to us. But again, it's very important to do mashwara. He had ulama in his council. He had wise men in his council. And he said, don't do that. That's not what we are meant. That's not what we represent. We won't do that. These people are innocent people. They had nothing to do with what happened decades ago. So Salahuddin comes in and is like, yes, you are right. I agree. We will let them go. So he's like, pay up 10, you can leave. So these evil Christian leaders, the Pope and whoever, the individuals who are at the higher level of their whole hierarchy, they take all their money and dip. And they don't care about any of the regular people in the city, even their own Christians. Like they don't care. They just dip. They pay their 10 and leave. So now, after 40 days, there's thousands of people, because they're poor people. They can't afford anything. They can't pay those 10 gold coins and leave. There's thousands of people there. So Salahuddin's brother, Asaduddin, he comes, no, not Asaduddin, I'm forgetting his name, but he comes and he says, listen, hey, I want you to give me a gift of 1,000 of those, now they're all prisoners of war, technically, all those people after 40 days. I want you to give me 1,000 of these people as mine, as a gift. Salahuddin's like, sure, take them. He takes it and he says, I free them for the sake of Allah. So he pays for all those 1,000 people and lets them all leave free. Then Salahuddin is like, I will do the same thing too. So for each military man, each one of his generals or something like that, he frees 1,000 on their behalf and he pays up himself. And what was the impetus of all this? The widows of all the Christian men that passed away, they come to him and they beg Salahuddin, listen, we don't have anything to pay. Salahuddin starts crying, seeing at their, again, these are Christian women. He starts crying, seeing at their condition. He's like, don't worry. And he pays for all of them, and he frees them, and any expenditure they need, he pays from his own wealth so that they can go back to wherever they want to go. But they have to leave that land right now for this period of time. And the Western chroniclers and the Western people that write about this, they mention that it's so sad that our own Christian leaders abandoned these people, and Salahuddin did this generous act. This is why Salahuddin is known, both sides. That's why they call him the Latinized version, Saladin. Everyone knows him as the generous king, right? So he paid up, and not a single person was killed like that, right? Non-military combatants were not killed at all when he came into Jerusalem. And this was a beautiful thing that Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, rahimahullah ta'ala, did. And I want to show you a picture. Nuruddin Zengi, he built this, can't see. Right over here, Nuruddin Zengi built this mimbar in Aleppo, I believe. And he's like, when we conquer Jerusalem, we're going to take this and give this as a gift to Masjid al-Aqsa. And so we're going to take this and give this as a gift to Masjid al-Aqsa. Obviously, Nuruddin Zengi did not live to see that. So Salahuddin, as basically like a bequeath and as a will from his senior, Nuruddin Zengi, he takes that. This is also another sign to show that they were not having jealousy to each other. He takes that and he puts it in Masjid al-Aqsa. And this member, it lasted from all the way from the 1100s all the way till just in the 1970s, I believe. 70s or either 1970s, where an arsonist came and burnt it down. But this same member, that's what we have a picture of, the same member that Nuruddin Zengi had built, untouched, was brought and was there till, that's crazy thing, that's like 700, 800 years it's been sitting there. This Nuruddin Zengi, he had such hope that he would conquer this place. So he already made a member. This would be for the Imam who's going to lead that, for Masjid al-Aqsa. So it was there till 1970s until it was burnt down due to an arsony of, I'm not sure if it was a Christian or a Jew, but yeah, that's what happened over there. Let's go back. So in 1187, Salahuddin liberates Jerusalem. This is the third crusade, called in response to the liberation. It doesn't go anywhere. This is where Richard the Lionheart leads the crusade, and you know the famous conversations and the famous interaction between Richard and Salahuddin, they're kind of romanticized as being these enemies, but they had this sense of, not friendship, but they had respect, mutual respect amongst each other. But it was mostly a failure. Long story short, the Muslims did lose some lands, but they kept Jerusalem, and then they agreed that the Christians can come as pilgrims, only as pilgrims. They can't come, they cannot bring any weapons into the city, and that was the practice for years after that. So the effect of the Crusades, we'll finish off with this, is that in the Muslim lands, it was mostly negligible. Now this is, right, pretty crazy to hear. It did not have much of an impact beyond those 80 years in the Muslim land itself. Because again, it's on the western strip of Syria. It didn't have too much of a big impact. Also, to what is to come in a few decades after, the Crusades were just kind of an afterthought. It's very important to us today, and it should be, because of the political landscape that's taking on place over there. That's what we need to know about. But in the past, it was okay, it was bad, it sucked, a lot of people died. We don't want to undermine that, right? But it wasn't given as much as a huge, musibah, as a trial as what is to come after. What is to come after? You want to take a guess? Yes, mashallah. The Mongols, they conquered and they caused destruction to a huge amount of the Muslim land, right? To such an extent, some scholars thought they were the Ya'juj and Ma'juj. Some scholars thought that Qiyamah was coming, right? So they caused a huge rampage and eruption amongst Muslim lands. So, in terms of that, the Crusaders was like an afterthought. Again, we don't want to undermine it, but the whole point I'm just trying to say, it's very, very important to us today is because of what's taking place there right now. Secondly, it's the end of the Fatimids and the rise of the Ayyubid dynasty, which is from the children of Salahuddin. However, they don't last too long because the Mamluk Empire dynasty takes over, but that's a story for another day. In Europe, though, the Crusades had a huge impact. This is the first time Europeans have left Europe and conquered lands outside of Europe. So this kind of lit the fire or desire to conquer more lands. So what do they do after this? Shortly after this, they start going to Muslim Spain. Shortly after this, and a few centuries after this, is when we have the whole colonization by the European countries. So this is the first time they experienced non-European lands. They're like, hey, we did it once, we can keep doing it. And this also it made them very rich. We're not going to talk about that right now, but it made them, especially the Italian countries, Italian city-states, it was very rich for them. So it strengthened the Catholic Church due to the power they're now able to assert over people, also in terms of finance as well. And also the Crusaders, one specific crusade, they're trying to come to the Syrian lands, they're trying to come to the Muslims. They stop in Constantinople and like, hey, let's just sack these other Christians, these Orthodox Christians. They go in and they do a massacre. Again, their own Christians, and they just stay there, they forget about the Muslims. Again, these are barbarians. The Crusaders, these people, these knights, these individuals, they're barbarians. These are the complete most barbaric people. And everyone kind of knows, even the Christians accept that. These were barbaric people. They went and just killed a bunch of people in Constantinople. And this very much weakened the Eastern Orthodox Roman Empire. And this eventually led to their downfall in 1453 when Mehmed Fatih Sultan II is able to conquer the Ottoman Sultan is able to conquer Constantinople, and it becomes the head, which is Istanbul, modern-day Istanbul today. So in terms of Europe, it had a huge impact, the Crusades, but in terms of Muslim lands, not so much, because what is to come right after? Lastly, Salahuddin, he passes away in 1193, Common Era 589 Hijri. He passed away at around Fajr time. When he passed away, he did not have enough wealth to be zakat eligible. Think about that. Most of us here are not zakat eligible. This man, the Salahuddin, Sultan Salahuddin, the king of Syria and Cairo and Jerusalem, did not have enough money to be zakat eligible. He had enough money to be zakat eligible. That's how, this is a typo. He had enough wealth to be zakat eligible. That means us could give zakat to Salahuddin if we're alive at that time. He did not have much wealth at all when he's passing away. No property, no real estate, no garden, only a few silver coins that his few children inherited from him, and he was buried along with his sword. What we want to learn from Salahuddin is that change does not come from one person. Change comes from a generation of people. Nuruddin Zengi, one day he wakes up, and his wife is in a very bad mood. He's like, okay, what's going on? Like, why are you in a bad mood? She's like, I miss my tahajjud salah. I missed my tahajjud salah. So she was in a very bad, she had such remorse that she missed her tahajjud salah. Nuruddin Zeng was like, okay, I have an idea. He put out a job, a very high paying position, for an individual to go around making a loud noise with a duff or like a drum type of thing at tahajjud time so people can wake up for tahajjud. He gave a huge amount of money for that person to do that every single day. Because of this, the entire population of those cities were praying tahajjud. The entire population. Think about this. The remorse of one woman missing, one individual missing her tahajjud salah resulted in the entire city praying tahajjud salah. These were the type of people, this generation was the type of people that was able to take back Al-Quds. These were the type of people that were able to fight against the Crusades. So if you want change, we can't just sit here and wait for some guy like Salahuddin to come. We can't just sit here and wait for some guy like Imam Mahdi to come. No, we need to be the agents of change. Allah says that nothing will change until you change. Nothing will change until you change. Until we change, we're not going to have righteous leaders. Until we change, we're not going to see somebody like Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Until we change, we're not going to see like something like Sultan Salahuddin. We have to change. We have to be the agents of change. We have to help other people change. We can't just be tunnel vision, just think about ourselves, think about our dunya. We have to think about our akhirah and the akhirah of all those people around us as well. This is what we have to do as a community, right? This was not just a one-person show. No way. He had a solid group of individuals, solid army members who would pray when they would go out in the battle. Salahuddin would recite a hadith within the sufuf and the rows of the military men. When they would wake up, the entire camp would be praying tahajjud. They would be making dua all night long. These were the people that changed. These were the people that changed the political landscape. So if we want to see change, we can't now say, oh my God, why is this happening? Oh, does God exist? Is this real? And just give up. That's not going to change anything, right? And if we abandon, Allah will bring people who will stand firm. If we abandon, Allah will bring people who stand firm. Again, this is not this is a history class. This is not an aqidah class. We don't have time to delve into that. But there are, just as so we know there's so many rational proofs, logical proofs of the existence of God. There's the problem of evil, there's answers to that. But we have to go out there and learn that. We have to go out there and understand that. And their ilm is there, we have to seek their ilm. Their ilm is there, we have to seek the knowledge. And with this, I just want to end with one of the purposes of our visit is to visit this Detroit, Michigan community, to invite everyone here on June 17, 18, 19 to the Dar es Salaam annual retreat, national retreat. Due to COVID, many masajid are not hosting programs. Alhamdulillah, we thank Allah to this organization and these masajid like this place that allow such events. Many places are closed shut. You not even allowed to pray. And if you pray, you can't even read a hadith of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam after salah. Then you have to leave. Right? Many times, even in some city, masjid in Chicago, you're not allowed inside the masjid. You're right outside and you can't come in. We don't know you type of stuff. Right? So we have this ni'mah, we have programs taking place. Many places, these huge events are not taking place. So we want to have this event, national seminar. It's completely free. You register at masjidds.org, check outside at the booth. You register. All meals are covered. Just come. Bring yourself. Bring your wife. Bring your kids. Bring your family. There's so many different events going on. We're going to have parallel sessions for men and women. We're also going to have sister-only sessions. We're going to have only Arabic sessions. We're going to have English-only sessions. We're going to have youth sessions. We're going to have sessions for the younger ones as well. Okay? So many different programs are going to take place. Alhamdulillah, we have a new seminary campus where we have a whole NCAA court that was built by the same people who made the Houston Rockets court. Okay? So it's an actual nice court. We're going to have basketball tournaments, inshallah ta'ala, for both men and the women. Come, inshallah. We're going to have a campfire in the night. We're going to have campfire with some of the ulama. We'll spend time together for the youth. Ask your questions. Come. If you're coming by yourself, right? Do i'tikaf. There will be i'tikaf for the brothers. If you're coming with your family, this hotel's right around Dar es Salaam. About $70, $60 a night. You get it for 2-3 nights. Just come, spend time in Chicago. Chicago's an amazing place. A lot of halal food there as well. Spend an extra day if you want to and explore Chicago. Secondly, the next day after the retreat, we have the 4-week Deen Intensive. In this Deen Intensive, we're going to have 6 classes. First class is going to talk about hadith. Now, not in any particular order, but first class is about hadith. That, okay, look, we have this hadith. How do we know Prophet ﷺ said it? We have this hadith. How do we know it's a legitimate sanad doctrine? What is this sanad? What is this chain of narration? Right? Those of you who want to sign up, I'm assuming you're going around passing that, so I guess you can just give it to people.
I just have, I can write down names and emails for those who are ready and follow.
Okay. Those who want to know more information, who just want to sign up to the retreat, even if you can't make it, at least you get the email notification. So just raise your hand and it'll come to you, inshallah. No, inshallah. We can just do that in the meantime. So as I was saying, first class is going to be hadith, talking about how hadith is legitimate. Second class, we're going to talk about aqidah, our essential, the rational proof of God's existence. Why does evil exist? How do we know Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam existed? How do we know the Quran is true, right? I'm asking these questions not to put doubt, but to get you guys to come, inshallah, right? So all these, we have a whole system of philosophy and theology to prove our beliefs. Just because we don't know it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Allah says in the Quran, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you do not know. Right? Third class is going to be on the essentials of fiqh, right? How to pray, how to do tahara. The fourth class is Western intellectual history. Inshallah, I'll be teaching that class. And that class will be discussing of how the modern secular world that we exist in today, how did it come to be? How did we end up here today? Why is the world so atheistic? Why is the world so anti-religion? It just didn't happen overnight. There's a whole 2,000-year history. And we're going to discuss that history, inshallah ta'ala. And there's going to be a hadith class, another class on misunderstood verses. Verses of the Quran which are commonly quoted that, hey, okay, this ayah is talking about this. What does this mean? All these different verses that are misquoted and misunderstood by Muslims and non-Muslims alike, we're going to talk about that as well. And the last class is slipping my mind. I can't remember what the last class is. If you guys, Jose, do you remember what the last class is?
I'm sorry?
Do you know what the last class for the Deen Intensive is?
The last class is the I'm not sure.
Oh, Tazkiyah. Yeah, Tarbiyah and Tazkiyah. Practical advice to how we can change our life. Practical advice to how can we be more spiritually connected to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's a very famous class that Mufti Azimuddin has been doing for decades. I mean, for about a decade now. So inshallah, try to attend. It's 4 weeks. You come, it's 9 to 2. The rest of the day, you're free to do what you want. There's boarding over there. Meals will be provided. And you can check about financial information. We don't reject a student based upon their financial circumstances. If you cannot pay up, speak to the people. There's scholarships, okay? Speak to the office. So think about that, inshallah. And of course, we have a 1-year program, which more details of that can be provided online. But come for the retreat, inshallah. Please make attention. Those who still want to come, please raise your hand so the brother can come with the thing. There's a brother right here. May Allah accept and may Allah make this a means of hidayah for the entire community, inshallah. Say ameen. Ameen. So, inshallah, we try our best to come for this retreat again, June 17th, 18th, and 19th. Okay? Please, and to end it off, the cherry on top, Sunday after Salatul Zuhr. As you know, Dar Salam has a 1-year program, summer program. We also have a 7-year Alimiyah program where we build young scholars to be the leaders of tomorrow. Okay? So that Sunday, the 19th, right? The 20th, I believe. I might be mixing up the dates, but it's that weekend, right? It's 18, 19, 20. Right?
20th, yeah.
18, 19, 20. So that Sunday, our second batch of scholars are graduating. 7 scholars that were educated in America, that know how to deal with the situation in America, the questions that are brought up in America, dealing with the secular world, Islam versus evolution. These type of people are graduating, inshallah ta'ala. 7 students who have studied 7 years of Arabic, of fiqh, of hadith, and they're finishing up their hadith discussion. This year they've been studying Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Ibn Majah, Tirmidhi, Nasai, all these different books. They're going to be reciting the last hadith of Bukhari as a class, and it's going to be taken as a class session in front of everyone to see. This is what we know as the Bukhari Khatam. Now the Bukhari Khatams have been taken in America for a while, but this is something that's very, very special. A very, very special moment. So come to that and see what it means to see the Islamic tradition. See what it means to see young scholars graduating in America. Born and raised in America, taught in America by teachers who know who are transmitting the knowledge to students in America, inshallah ta'ala. So that's just the end I wanted to mention, inshallah. I really hope that I can see many of you, inshallah, on that event, inshallah. And I hope we take a lesson from Salahuddin. We all need to introspect. This man was so great. How can we take some of his qualities into our own life? 2 books that I want to mention. One is by Dr. One book is by Dr. Ali As-Sallabi, Dr. Sallabi. If you just Google him, Dr. Sallabi, Salahuddin, you will find a PDF. 3 volumes, each volume is like hundreds of pages, okay? Dr. Sallabi and the Salahuddin, it's in English, okay? That's from a Islamic perspective, on Arabic, or a Muslim scholar perspective. We also have other books, right? Now this book is in English, much shorter, it's like 300 pages. It's in very nice English. You will be addicted. You will pick it up, you don't want to drop it, okay? However, I'm going to mention to you a couple things you have to take with a grain of salt, okay? Don't take everything that he says there. He's a non-Muslim at the end of the day. It's called Salahuddin, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and the author's name is Stanley Lane Poole. Again, the author's name is Stanley Lane Poole. This is a shorter read, but it is more interesting to read because it is it's literally like a whole series going through it. very addictive to reading, inshallah. We need to read. We need to become those individuals who Allah Azza wa says, Iqra, read, inshallah ta'ala. So with that, inshallah, we will end. I think the pizza's already here, so I don't want to take any more time. Jazakumullah khair. I appreciate this community and the organizers and the board members for giving us this opportunity. Jazakumullah khair. Wa akhu da'wana, alhamdulillah.